Hey, today I have the pleasure to host Olivier Susi, who gonna show us a platform or a tool he developed on the top of Databricks. But first, let's get to know more Olivier. Hi.
Hi, Youssef. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to have that discussion with you. So a bit of introduction about myself. I don't come from the data world. I come from mechanical engineering. I've been spending a good 10 to 12 years building flight simulation, helicopter simulation to be exact. But gradually I've moved towards more data centric and data focused role, and it kind of became my passion and what I've been striving to build. So I've worked with a few different companies and helping them either building a data platform or helping them with their data engineering work. And as I was doing it, I found that there was a need of, some kind of framework that would help these companies to build their data platform or lakehouse more efficiently. So that's essentially why I decided to start building the framework Laktory that I'm going to be presenting today. And it's an open source project that I'll be super happy to discuss. And essentially, I want to bring your attention to the existence of that framework. So if anybody is interested in using it, then I'll be super happy to take them through a guided tour of some sort.
Yeah. And I know you explained this, but what was the reason behind developing this open source framework like Laktory, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, Laktory, that's correct. So essentially, I've worked with a crypto exchange company where I had to put data pipeline into production, and I wanted to make sure that these data pipeline were kind of tested, they were governed, and that I had the ability of deploying the same pipeline in a test environment, run some tests, and then deploy them into some kind of production environment. So while Databricks offer plenty of feature to run data pipeline and to have very efficient computing, it didn't have anything for kind of managing that process of developing, deploying, and maintaining data pipelines. So that's essentially where the idea came from. So I started building some kind of a framework internally, and then I started to realize that a lot of companies are essentially doing the same thing in their own businesses. So I thought it might be a good idea to actually, extend the framework that I was developing, make sure it's generic enough to suit everybody's needs, and to essentially deploy it to the open source community, so more businesses could use it. And my intention is really to build a community around it so business can use it, but mostly can contribute to it and grow something that's going to be very useful for many companies. And we can essentially walk that journey together. So that was the main motivation behind the development of this framework.
Okay, that's cool. And I think if I'm not wrong, like some parts may be overlapping with asset bundles. I don't know if you're familiar with asset bundles, but they can help like just deploy like of course the workflows and pipelines like DLT or jobs. I think yours covers much more things than asset bundles.
Yeah, that's entirely correct. And it's kind of a interesting story because I started building this framework before Asset Bundles was actually released. So for me, it was kind of very interesting to see that Databricks was working on something similar but different at the same time. And my offering, like you said, has some overlap with Asset Bundles, but is also different in some ways. So the main difference is that Laktory support any resources that is available in Databricks. So if you're talking about cluster, warehouses, secrets, catalog, metastore, external location. So any kind of component that you can deploy typically through Terraform, you can deploy it through Laktory, while Asset Bundles is more focused on workflows. I know that it has evolved in the last few weeks and few months, so more components have been supported. But the approach is very similar. In both cases, it's a YAML based configuration that you use to deploy to Databricks. Also, in the case of Laktory, I essentially support two different backends for the deployment. So while Asset Bundles only support Terraform, Laktory support both Terraform and Pulumi. So if your business is using Pulumi, then it's kind of interesting because you can integrate it in the same ecosystem. You have the same platform for the deployment, so you have the options. But I would say that the key differentiator between Laktory and Asset Bundles is Laktory as an internal ETL pipeline model. So not only you can define your resources, but you can also define your data transformation and your data asset. And that's really the big differentiator between the two. And that's what I was trying to accomplish with Laktory, is the ability of not only defining your resources, but also defining your data transformation in a single place. So essentially what Laktory is about is it's a proposition for replacing potentially asset bundles, Terraform, and also dbt, because you can actually define your data transformation. So instead of having to deal with three different technologies and three different framework, you can package everything into a single solution. So it makes it a lot simpler to operate your data platform. And something that I've seen in many businesses is that typically you're going to have two groups. You're going to have a group that is more specialized in DevOps that will manage the infrastructure, but also the deployment of Unity Catalog, the configuration of the workspaces through Terraform. And you have a second group, more data analysts, data engineering, or data analytics focus, that will manage the workflows through asset bundles. And to some extent, it kind of creates some friction because you have to, make sure that these two teams communicate very well. And sometimes you have dependencies between the two, and it's not as efficient as it could be. So with Laktory, you have the ability of deploying everything from the same framework. And because you don't need to understand Terraform, it makes it very accessible for data engineer and data analysts to actually manage not only their workflows, but also to manage Unity Catalog, to manage the grant, the secret, and anything to run your Lakehouse.
And can you show us like just an overview of on how Lectory looks like? Like, is it YAML based, and how do you fill the component to, like an example, how you deploy maybe a workflow?
Yeah, definitely. So let me share something with you that will kind of illustrate a little bit how Lactory works and how it can be used. So I was saying, Lactory is really a DataOps and also a DataFrame centric ETL framework. So as opposed to DBT, which is very SQL based, Lactory is mainly built around DataFrame API. So as I was mentioning, like why did I develop it is really about scaling up and deploying Databricks governed pipeline to production is typically really hard. Also working as a multi-user team that is also DataOps friendly is non-trivial. And managing a lot of third-party tools can be overwhelming for a team. So in a nutshell, Lactory is really about simplifying DataOps, simplifying your ETL. And as I was mentioning before, it's really about, potentially, replacing Asset Bundles, Terraform, and DBT in a single solution. Um, and you can see over here, and I'll go into more details about the the declaration into YAML files. This is an example of a pipeline, but in terms of architecture, this is really how Laktory works. You have YAML file that you input into the system. It's going to do some validation, and then it will build your data pipeline, and then it will get deployed onto your Databricks workspace. And the basic concept behind the data pipeline is you define a collection of nodes with a source, a transformer, and a sink. So your source can be anything from a volume on Databricks. It could be a data table. It could be some files on a path. And then your transformer is really where you define your data transformation. So it could be SQL transformation. It could be Spark function that you're calling, and your sink is essentially where you want to write this output. So again, to a volume, to some kind of Unity catalog table. You have many options that are supported. So how does it actually work? So let's look at an example. So as I was mentioning, you can declare your entire lakehouse with Laktory. So your main entry point is a stack YAML file in which you're going to be defining, your collection of resources. So it can range from catalog to secret, warehouses, notebooks, and the flagship feature of Laktory, your actual pipelines. And you have a couple of options around this. Like I was mentioning, you can define your backend that you want to use for your deployment. So in this case, we're using Terraform, but Pulumi is also available. You have the option of defining multiple environments. So if you want to deploy the same stack to multiple workspaces and have a very specific configuration. So very typical example is when you deploy to a test environment, and you don't want to run your workflow with the same schedule as you would do in your production environment, then you have the ability of reconfiguring your schedule for each of the environment, and you have the ability of defining variables. So like I was saying, it's a very similar concept to asset bundles. So when you define a resource, it's essentially using Terraform as a backend, which also rely on Databricks REST API. So the name of the properties will be the same that you're already familiar with. There's really nothing new to learn. The only difference is that you also have the ability of defining your access control within the resource itself. So we have an example here where we define a warehouse, and we can define the access control directly in the definition of the resource, which is really convenient, because if you were to do that with Terraform, it's a lot of resource to define. You have to create links between the different IDs, and it's much more involving. So this is one example of a resource. You also have the ability of defining a pipeline. So this is really the key feature of Laktory. So you define your pipeline, and you can define an orchestrator. So the orchestrator will be essentially what will be running the pipeline. So currently you can deploy it as a Databricks job, but you can also deploy it as a DLT table, which is super interesting because some user or some businesses are kind of reluctant of using DLT, even if, in my opinion, it's a very good ETL framework. So with this approach, you have the ability of using DLT or not, and all you have to do is change your orchestrator. So it's a good way of trying it and see if it fits your need without actually locking yourself to using that technology. So once you've decided on your orchestrator, all you have to do is define a list of nodes, which are essentially your data tables. So here we have an example where we're dealing with stock prices. So your bronze table, if we're following the Medallion architecture, we're going to be reading the data from a volume, and we're going to be reading it as a stream. So it means that you can actually use Databricks autoloader in the backend just by specifying this option. and then you define where you want to write it. So in this case, we're going to be writing to Unity catalog as a table name, and you have multiple, write mode that are supported. In the case of the silver table, it's kind of the same story. You define a source, but in this case, it's the previous node that you've defined. You also define your sink. You also have the ability of defining multiple sink. And I'll explain why in a minute. But here, the main difference is that you have a transformer. And as I was explaining before, the transformer is essentially a daisy chain of transformation. And you can mix and match SQL expression and Spark functions. So this is really, really powerful because it really helps you use the best of both worlds whenever it better fits your need. So for example, here, the first transformation is just a select on the bronze table. We're going to be selecting your columns. And then you're calling the drop duplicates method from Spark. And then you essentially provide the argument to that function. And you can daisy chain as many operations as you want, and you can also provide your own custom Spark transformation. So really, really powerful in terms of what you can do. You also have the ability of defining expectation. So if you have constraint that you want to impose on your data set in terms of values for a given column. You can also define expectation in terms of aggregation. So if you want the average value of a column to be above a certain value, or if you want to count the number of columns, it's also possible. And another great feature is if you define these expectations and define an action called quarantine, you can also actually store these results into a quarantine table. So you don't have anything else to do. You just create a sink where you specify that you want to use the quarantine results. So it really helps, putting together some quality gates and having the ability of exploring the data afterwards. And like I was mentioning earlier, all of that is kind of compatible with both Databricks Job and DLT, so you can deploy it into both orchestrator, depending on which one you want to use. So once you have your data pipelines and all your resource created, you can use the Laktory CLI to do your deployment. So you're just going to call Laktory deploy and the name of the environment, and it's going to use Terraform the backend. So the feedback that you're going to receive from the command prompt is exactly the same as you would from Terraform. And you can use any kind of Terraform options that you want to use. And once it's deployed, you have a few options for actually running your workflows and your data pipeline. And one of the most interesting one, in my opinion, is the ability of developing locally using Spark Connect. So you can create a local script that's going to essentially run your pipeline. So what it means is that you don't actually need to deploy anything to Databricks. You can configure your YAML file, you can execute your pipeline, and you're going to be able to explore the resulting data frame in your favorite IDE, whether it's VS Code or PyCharm or whatever you're using. And you're going to see exactly what's happening with your data transformation. And you can go back and forth and update your YAML file. And so it's very, very efficient to develop your transformation, to apply them, see the result, and make sure that they work before actually deploying it. And once they're deployed, so this is an example where it has been deployed as a DLT table. So very typical, you have a few tables that are
Streaming
created.
tables.
Views are also supported. Some of them are streaming, some of them are not. And you, like I was saying, if you change the orchestrator, you're going to have the ability of deploying exactly the same pipeline as a Databricks job, and it's going to look very similar because each task is going to be about the creation of a single table. So you're going to have a very similar feel to the Delta Life table. And you also have the ability from Laktory to run these workflows. So what it means, it has very good support for CI/CD. So in a typical CI/CD framework, you can define your deployment, and then run some of your workflow to make sure that they work before they're actually deployed to your production environment. So you have this ability of running your workflows with Laktory. So in a nutshell, that's really what Laktory is about. So it's really about simplifying DataOps and ETL practice. Um, it really helps to accelerate and ship value much quicker and more reliably into production environment. And it's reducing the cost because developing those data pipelines is much more efficient, especially with the ability of do the local development and the local testing. It also embrace the open source that is so close to Databricks with Delta, Spark, and all these other great components that are open source. And it's also a Databricks technology partner. So the company that I started, OQ, which is producing the software, is a Databricks partner. So it's a solution that is officially recognized by Databricks. And yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what Lectory is about. So I really believe it's really helpful for many businesses out there, and I would like the community to grow and more user to use it and to contribute to it.
Yeah, and I think it's looks amazing. And as you mentioned to me last time, like everyone can contribute to this project. It's hosted on GitHub, so they can add some modifications, suggestions, maybe open issues in case. But I see like it's super easy to get started with the with Lectory. And to be honest, it's super great. I will add, of course, the link to Ocube and also the link to the project. And if I'm not wrong, I think you also developed a Python library, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, well, Lactory is a Python library, so it's you can install it with the pip install, which is also gonna install the CLI. And what I've shown today is kind of the Databricks focus aspect of Lactory, but eventually Lactory is going to go far beyond this ecosystem, because what I haven't mentioned is Lactory supporting multiple DataFrame engine. So currently it supports Spark, but it also supports Polars. So if someone wants to build something entirely locally and run it locally, they can with Factory because they can run it with Polars. They can define essentially the same data transformation, but instead of using Spark, it's going to be using Polars, and this is all done through Python, obviously. If they want to switch to Spark, then all they have to do essentially is to change the backend for the DataFrame engine, and then it's going to be using Spark. And using Spark doesn't necessarily mean using Databricks. It means that if you have like a local installation of Spark or a Spark installation on a cluster, you can still use Lactory. Obviously, typically, I would recommend to use Databricks because it offers so many more features than you would have on your own. But the idea is to be able to scale to the size of your problem. So let's say that you start with a very small data set, you have some data exploration, you want to keep the cost to a minimum, then you can essentially build some kind of proof of concept locally using Polars or using a local Spark installation. And once you have something that works and you know that it's going to be kind of almost production ready, then you can deploy it to Databricks and use the full scalability of the platform and use Unity Catalog to distribute your data. So that's really the idea behind it, is to be able to really scale your operation based on the size of your data set. Because sometimes we use Spark by default because it's kind of the engine that is available in Databricks, but it's not always the optimal choice. So now you have that scalability option, and you don't have to do any kind of extra work to move from one to the others. Because what we've seen is people working, for example, with pandas to do some kind of analysis, and it works great. But when it comes time to deploy the same data transformation to Databricks, it doesn't work because obviously pandas is not able to work on multiple node, and it's not really Spark compatible. So with Laktory, you can define the same transformation locally and the one that are going to be using remotely on Spark. So you have the ability of switching between the two very easily. So it's really up to the user to decide how they want to use it. They can use YAML configuration because it kind of standardizes the process, but they also have the ability of building everything directly into Python without having to write YAML file. They can instantiate exactly the same classes, do exactly the same kind of operation. They can launch a job remotely on Databricks. So really up to the user preference.
That was crystal clear.
Great.
Do you have anything else to add before we close the session?
Um, well, I want to mention that working with Databricks has been an amazing journey for me. When I started building data platform, I've kind of looked at the different options, and for me, Databricks was kind of the most featured platform, so it was a natural choice to go with. So if anyone in the community is using Databricks, I encourage you to look up for Laktory. And I think where it's really interesting is I haven't seen many options out there that are DataFrame centric. Most data transformation or SQL based, and they don't really support Spark transformation. So if you're looking for a solution that will really be more compatible with Spark or with DataFrame API, you should definitely have a look. I'm always available for question if anyone is interested in a more extensive demo, or if they have question. I also have a Slack channel available that they can reach out to. I've been working with a few companies already. The solution has been deployed into production, and I've received really good feedback. So it's really about getting the word out there. I think the solution work. It's just to get more adoption, and hopefully we'll be able to grow that solution together.
That's perfect. Thank
Great.
you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And for those who are watching this recording, all the resources will be added in the description of the video. Thank you, Olivier.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day and see you soon.